This cornerstone, this solid ground, firm through the fiercest drought and storm.
The songs that we have sung, I hope, would trigger your memory back to the lessons that began the first Sunday in this month, as we began talking about and discussing the things that tie in with always being ready to give a defense of the hope that is in you. We don't necessarily need to have all the evidences found in the scriptures, because what we're called upon to do is give a defense of the hope that we have and the reason why we believe, why we have that faith, that hope, that trust. In Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created. Everything was set in motion at that point. Because if you look at the continuity of the scriptures, everything goes back to that God set everything in motion. Now, we've used this slide several times. You can see the little wooden bird in motion. It demanded that there be a creator, a design, implementation, and out of absolutely nothing, that the materials would be brought into existence in order to bring that about. So logic suggests out of Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created. It suggests a designer, materials, assemblage, and put into motion. You begin to think of Psalms 19 and Psalms 19, wherein the law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul. And in the first several verses of that particular psalm, it talks about the creation of all things. And then it talks about the creation of the plan. The law of the Lord is perfect. God is evidenced by the universe. You wouldn't even need to look at one passage of scripture to realize a superior being was in control of it all. Absolutely in control of it all. We spent some time talking about Psalms 14. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Well, we realize that there is. We looked at Romans 1:20 and supported that. Then we began to come back to the realm of logic and talked about it from the standpoint of absolute logic. What part of a plane flies? Well, it demands that it be a composition of all the various parts. We discussed nebular hypothesis and the Big Bang theory, continuous generation, when the simplicity of in the beginning stands more to reason. And, if there was the Big Bang, there had to be elements that brought it about. Where did those elements come from? Then we spent a little bit of time, and I'm not going to take any time going over the various thoughts that were addressed by scientists regarding the creation. Suffice to say, with the startling conclusion that God is behind it all. Einstein is noted as saying, the more I study science, the more I believe in God. We looked at the next quote, and we spent a little bit of time talking about it. The God of the Bible is also the God of the genome. He can be worshiped in the cathedral or in the laboratory. His creation is majestic, awesome, intricate, and beautiful. In a few weeks, you'll read an article, a little article that's going to be in our bulletin. And it deals with the aspect of DNA and just how interwoven the DNA is of a child and the mother, and how there is, I'm going to use the word phantom or ghost DNA of that child that remains in the mother, and that for decades and decades. So all of these things we looked at, that God created space, God created time, all of it. But now, we not only talked about God is revealed through morality, but we began talking about God is revealed by and through his word. And the fact that his word remains constant. His word remains true in all things. Turn back into 2 Corinthians, into the 10th chapter. And 1 Corinthians, into the 2nd chapter and verse 10. Wherein Paul writes, "For to us God revealed them through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, even the depths of God. For who among men knows the thoughts of a man, except the spirit of the man which is in him? Even so the thoughts of God no one knows except the Spirit of God. Now we have received," Paul writes, "not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit is from God, that we might know the things freely given to us by God, which things we also speak, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, combining spiritual thought with spiritual words." That's what we do. From the very outset, in the beginning, God set everything into motion. You get into the 2nd chapter, and you begin to see man entering into the picture. Into the 3rd chapter of Genesis, and sadly, sin enters into the world. And God then keeps man from the garden and the flaming sword, which is the word of God, protects the tree on every side. Now, the remainder of the Bible then, I'm convinced, shows the way back to that tree. And as you look at the last chapter of Revelation, that journey is completed. And it shows the way back to that tree. See, God set everything into motion. Everything works in synchronicity, an absolute balance. This watch I have, it's a Seiko. Linda bought it for me, I don't know how many years ago. But it works in precision. Absolute precision. The only problem is I've got to keep my hand going to keep it going because it's a self-winding watch. So if I take it off and just set it aside and forget time for a while, it stops. Then I have to activate it by rotating it again. I thought it had a battery in it. Took it to the guy and he goes, "You're an idiot. It's self-perpetuating." That's God's word. It is self-perpetuating. The problem is, man sets it off to the side and doesn't do anything with it. But God set everything into motion. And whether or not we accept it, doesn't matter. God said it. That settles it. And that's what we've been talking about. And so has God proven himself to you by and through his word? I mean, John, the entire gospel, it was written for the purpose that we would look at this few miracles there and believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And that we have manuscript after manuscript that prove the authenticity of the scriptures. But what about Christ? What about him? Do we have enough evidence to prove that Jesus is the Christ? That he is the one that was to have been sent? Do we have that? And I contend that we have all that we need and then some. Last week we proved that historically he is a fact to be reckoned with. Historically. But let's look biblically, because that's wherein we want to place our thoughts. It is said that there are over 300 prophecies, direct or indirect, referring to the Christ. Now, truly amazing when you begin to think about it. All those prophecies, all that attention. I've got several of them listed here on these pages. And they go on and on and on. For example, his birth was foretold. He'd be born of a virgin, Isaiah 7, verse 14. Fulfillment, Matthew, the first chapter, verses 18 through 25. Be of the seed of Isaac, Genesis 21:12. Luke 3 begins to deal with the genealogy there. Tribe of Judah. We see that replicated Old Testament, New Testament. Born in Bethlehem, Micah, 5th chapter, verse 2. Correspond that with Matthew, 2nd chapter, and verses 1 through 6. Herod would kill the children. Jeremiah 31:15. Contrast with Matthew 12:16 through 18. Just those should be enough. Should be enough to base your faith on. Those are removed by hundreds and hundreds of years. In California right now, as the election comes up, there's a lot of back and forth between people on online betting for sports. And as I was reading the sports page this morning, I was looking at the upcoming games. And even as the article was concluding, the individual who wrote the article said, well, I like the 49ers by 24-17 over the Rams. And here's how I do on the point spread. Here's how I do on my predictions. And I'm 3 for 4. Or one guy said he was 5 for 2 or whatever. They're not perfect, and it's speculative. And nobody is 100%. Even the economist. You know, they're talking about we're not going to have a recession. If we do, it's going to be soft landing. We can do this, we can do that. No offense, Haley, but they're as crazy as a loon. Yeah, we're going to have. We're going to have that. We're going to go into recession. How deep? Is it going to be slight? How are we going to come out of it? Best guess. And I'm sure if you sat down and talked with Haley, she would tell you, I mean, there is a science to economics. I don't diminish that. But nobody knows for certain. And to be as precise as the prophecies are regarding the Christ are amazing. Go to Isaiah 53. And in Isaiah 53, and we've had it read as we surround the table, it is beyond one's comprehension. The absolute profundity of the prophecy therein. And so Isaiah 53. Who has believed our message? Stop. Have you believed what God said in Genesis 1:1? In the beginning. Al talked about it as we surrounded the table a little bit. That it is a matter of faith. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. It is impossible. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And by faith, we believe that the worlds were created by God. That's Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1, 3, and 6. So now here, who has believed our message? Have you accepted it? Have you accepted it? But now he's going to tell us something even more precise, because he's going to tell us of the day on which the Messiah is crucified. And it's going to point right to that time. And there could have been no orchestration. This is written before crucifixion was even conceived as a form of of torture and ultimately death. Look at verse 2. He grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of a parched ground. He has no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. When the Messiah would come, empty himself into the form of man, he did not come as a resplendent beauty, at least in his personage. He was a simple, common, ordinary individual. We weren't going to be attracted to him. Mankind wasn't going to be attracted to him because of his appearance, but because of what he taught, what he did. He was despised, verse 3, forsaken of men, man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, like one from whom men hid their face. He was despised, we did not esteem him. Now you go on reading. He was oppressed in verse 7. He was afflicted, did not open his mouth, like a lamb that is led to slaughter, like a sheep that is silent before its shearers. He did not open his mouth. You go on, and you see where he would be, his death would be with the robbers and so on. Isaiah 53 is precise. But Isaiah 53 isn't the only place where you have that level of precision. Zechariah, the 11th chapter, sold for 30 pieces of silver. How could they have known that? That's exactly what happened. The money would be eventually cast out to the potter. Judas felt remorse for what he did, took the money back to give to the powers that be of the Jewish nation. They go, no. We want nothing to do with it. This is blood money. What hypocrisy. The money was thrown out into potter's field. On and on it goes. 300 prophecies, either direct or indirect. The fact that he entered in triumphantly into the city before his crucifixion, what the people did. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And yet people still struggle with Jesus. Then when you begin to think of the miracles, healing of the blind man, raising Lazarus from the dead. Oh, no. By now he stinks in John 11. Been dead 4 days. How could you know this to be true? And then try to kill him. But not only him, you have to kill the evidence. Destroy the evidence. And the evidence is Lazarus. And you read the scriptures, and you focus on John's writing, and that's exactly what did transpire. The evidence is more than apparent. Absolutely more than apparent. But there's more evidence. Evidence that points to his coming. Evidence that is brought about by nations that surround. And I could bore your mind with, probability factors and things of that nature of just one of the prophecies being fulfilled. I'm not going to do that. It just, your eyes glaze over. They roll back. You know, and I know it's impossible for that to happen. Absolutely impossible. Unless God revealed it. And God put it all into motion for a specific reason. So you see on the overhead various references to prophecies. But before we do that, let's go back to Deuteronomy, into the 18th chapter. And in Deuteronomy, the 18th chapter, drop down with me if you would, and into verse 17. So you're in Deuteronomy 18 and verse 17. And I imagine it's kind of hard for you to get there right away. You don't usually go back to Deuteronomy. But look at verse 17 of 18. And the Lord said to me, they have spoken well. I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you. And I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I commanded him. And it shall come about that whoever will not listen to my words, which he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. But the prophet who shall speak a word presumptuously in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, of which he shall speak in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. And you may say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? Verse 22. When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not come about or true, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. Go to Isaiah, the 41st chapter. Drop down into verse 21. Isaiah 41, 21. And notice what we find there. Present your case, says the Lord. Bring forward your strong arguments. The King of Jacob says, let these bring forth and declare to us what is going to take place. As for the former events, declare what they were, that we may consider them and know their outcome, or announce to us what is coming. Declare the things that are going to come afterward, that we may know that you are gods. Indeed, do good or evil, that we may anxiously look about us and fear together. Well, what Peter writes is we have the prophetic word made more sure, to which we would do well as to a lamp shining in a dark place. Stop and think of all the prophecies, all of them, that are spoken of in the Old Testament. The fall of Tyre in Ezekiel, the 26th chapter, verses 7 through 12. And it happened exactly as it was foretold. And yes, they did tear down the walls of the city. They did put them in the sea to build kind of like a land bridge to go out to the little island out there, which is where the inhabitants of Tyre had retreated to, thinking that it would save them. It didn't. The fulfillment was clear and definitive. And it was carried about by Alexander the Great sometime after Nebuchadnezzar had taken the city. And Alexander came back around, wanted their help. They said no, thought they were safe. Alexander said, no, you're not safe. Fulfillment of the prophecy. Did Alexander know he was fulfilling prophecy? Did he do it to do that? No, absolutely not. We spent some time a couple of weeks ago on Sunday afternoon trying to bring everything into full fruition, predicated on something, a question that was asked. And we looked at Daniel, the 8th chapter, the foretelling of the Mede and Persian Empire, ultimately the telling of the rise of the Macedonians under Alexander, the division, once Alexander died, of his army be divided into 4 parts: Macedonia, Thrace, Egypt, and Syria. None would have his power. We talked about Daniel, the 11th chapter, where you have absolute precision. Again, going back to this watch and looking at it, and you can see the movement of the second hand, watching as it ticks down and points directly to when the time would come. It's Daniel 11. Takes us up to the Battle of Actium. when Mark Antony and Cleopatra were defeated, the ascendancy of Caesar, the rise of the Roman Empire. How did they know that? How? How was Daniel made aware of that and the precision therein? Daniel is so precise that commentators and those that question the scriptures try to say, you know what? It had to be told after the fact. It wasn't. It wasn't. It was told in real time, looking forward to when it would be fulfilled. Destruction of Jerusalem, talked about in Daniel 9, verse 27. The abomination of desolation. That wasn't fulfilled until 70 AD, but it was fulfilled. And even Jesus talked about the abomination that makes desolate. So what do we do with it? You can see on the overhead, I think you can read it. Maybe you can't, I apologize. But let me read it to you. Bertram Ram said, one real case of fulfilled prophecy would establish a supernatural act. Therefore, radical doubt must be certain. It has silenced the testimony of all prophecies. Whereas the Christian asserts that rather than resting the case of one prophecy, there are dozens at the beck and call. They're right there. All at our fingertips. Why? Because it's going to show why we have a hope in us. I trust God. If God said it, that settles it. Why? Because in the beginning, God set everything in motion. He set the universe in motion. He set in motion the bringing about of the salvation of mankind. The Old Testament heralds that. The Old Testament is rich with the prophecies looking toward. And Christ brings it all about. Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill, is what Jesus said during the Sermon on the Mount. He fulfilled each and every one. That is why I have hope. That is why the hope resides in me. And I am more than happy to give it and share it with anyone. So put it all together. You put everything together. Everything we began talking about on October 2nd. And we began just laying it out logically, the way Paul did to the Areopagus on Mars Hill. Logic. Began to explore logic. Began looking at passages, showing truly that God's behind it all. And how could it be without God's direction? And we looked at the various passages of Scripture. Psalms 19. Psalms 139, which talks about the omniscient, the omnipresence, the omnipotence of God, and how fortunate we are. God has spoken to us by and through his word. 119th Psalm celebrates that fact over and over and over again. 2 Peter, the first chapter, verses 12 through 21. Peter talks about it. We did not follow cleverly devised tales. We didn't. And we know that. We look at it. We understand it. And we appreciate it. Now, there are so many subtleties in the scripture we could have looked at. I mean, we could have talked about, the symbolism of the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh being brought to Jesus. We could have talked about the wise man in the region of Babylon looking, waiting for the sign, and could have tied that back to Daniel so easily. But we didn't need to. There is so much there whereby we can have faith and hope, and we can defend God's word. We have the prophetic word made more sure, to which we would do well to pay attention to it, as to a light shining in a dark place. When you enter into this building at night, there are no lights on whatsoever. It is darker than dark. And you long for something, any light to see. Any light. And there are none. You find your way to a light switch, turn it on. It's great. Having been here so many times in the dark, I know where the light switches are. You enter into the door, boom, it's right there. But you come in through the back. And that's the way to come in. Used to be. Because there used to be a window on the door. And you get a little bit of light that would emanate from the light in the parking lot. But that door is replaced. And now it is totally dark. Unfortunately, that's where mankind is. Mankind wants to remain totally in the dark. But all they have to do is open up the Word and begin to see the light. And they might ask you, about the hope that is in you. Why? And you need to be willing to share with them and tell them why. Greg told me just this morning, he told me a couple days ago, that he's lined up a class. And it's just simply because he was talking to somebody. And they kind of sort of asked him, why? And so Greg's lined up a class. I wanted to share that with you. Greg and I are going to be meeting with that person hopefully this week and begin that investigation to give a hope of why we have hope so that they can have hope as well. Well, the series of lessons is yours. If you want additional information, let me know. I'll be glad to give it to you because there's stacks of it. This is just the little bit of notes that I have for this. And usually I have 2 pieces of paper whenever I preach a lesson, the front and the back. There's a lot. I know Ralph's got a lot of material that he shared with me, and I appreciate that. But the lesson is yours today. It was not one designed necessarily to cause one to obey the gospel. Rather, it was just to talk about faith is the substance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. We trust God because in the beginning, God created. God put everything in motion. And if you're subject to the invitation anyway, we encourage you to come and let it be known. We'll assist you. For those of you that are on YouTube, there'll be a contact number and address so you can reach out. We'll be glad to set a time and talk with you, study with you, because we simply want you to come to that understanding. You don't have to remain in the dark.
In glorious day, up from the grave he rose.